If you really let this book affect you, it will disturb you, I would say. In some ways, it will also edify you in many ways. I think being willing to go on that ride is very important, because if you're in the right place in life and you can handle it, it is transformative. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, easily the best work of fiction that I've ever come across. You know, Nietzsche famously said that the only psychologist he ever needs to read is Dostoevsky. And after reading this book, I am not surprised. Now, not only did this book help bring me deeper into the Orthodox Church, I'll get to that in a few, this book also helped me understand psychology more, and I have a PhD in psychology. Dostoevsky is a fantastic psychologist. He's somebody who can just pack in so much nuance into a scene that could tell you so much more about a person, about a mindset, about a conundrum than any sort of abstract, objective analysis of psychology can really offer. In fact, by reading Dostoevsky, I have found that my appreciation for my background in subpersonalities and psychic multiplicity, and the fact that we're made up of many different parts that sometimes conflict, has been made even more intense and tangible. And as somebody who's coming into the Orthodox faith, I found that this book was just a fantastic bridge, because it gave me what I needed in terms of intellectual substance to sort of bridge my background with my new faith and commitment to Christ and his church. But at the same time, it helped me understand the church more, because this book is based in a setting where you are constantly in Orthodox culture, in Orthodox Russia. And I just found that to be very, very immersive. And Dostoevsky paints a picture in such a way that it brings you into the scene of how the Orthodox faith was lived in Russia, how it was their culture. Whereas here in the United States of America, you know, we hardly even have a culture. I would say we have a consumerist culture. I don't know what you would call our culture, but it certainly isn't anything rich or fantastic. But this book is just so good. So let me get into the details about why I love it and some of the things I love. First of all, every character has nuance, and they are divided in terms of being pulled in multiple directions at once. There's their conscience, there's the sense of carnal desire where they're just trying to get their own needs met, and then there's the conflict between them and their brothers, which is just very well articulated by Dostoevsky. In fact, any given character in this book, if you zoom in on them, let's take Alyosha, who's my favorite character, who is really the saint of this book, other than Elder Zosima. But Alyosha has a very loving heart, and his desire is to help others, and he is humble naturally. But even he is divided and gets pulled in multiple directions by different desires within him. And as he confronts the world, he is constantly beset by these very volatile characters. And obviously there's somewhat of a spoiler alert, but I won't get too deep if you want to go read this book. He's constantly faced with other people's deep divisions, and he always wants to help them, to rescue them, to pull them out of the muck and mire of their own life, and try to get them to come back to a loving life oriented towards God. And he's just, as the book moves on, he becomes more and more sophisticated, more and more able to realize that just being nice is not going to cut it here. I'm going to have a bit of a backbone and actually articulate myself as someone has a force of personality in the world, and at the same time carry that same love and compassion and kindness. And so as we move through this text, we see Alyosha integrating himself. This book is simultaneously a comedy and a tragedy. I mean, there's so many tragic elements to the characters themselves. Take Dmitri, Misha, for example, and he is so lovely, so complex, and yet so terribly fraught with deep issues that he just can't seem to get out of his own way, or nor does he want to. He's deeply attached to pleasure and is in deep addiction to, whether it be to alcohol or to chasing women or to just complete chaos. He's addicted to chaos. And yet he has this brilliant perceptual ability to see his own conundrum and to look in on himself and realize just how fraught he is, and just see these glimpses of hope where he could actually be rescued from his own issues if he would only focus a little more and gather himself a little more. So he's a very wonderful character. And then, of course, there's Ivan, who is brilliant and pessimistic and very much plays sort of the foil to Alyosha's naive optimism, let's say, which as I mentioned, as he goes through the book, he becomes less and less naive and more integrated. And actually, he ends up being more sophisticated than Ivan, who was towards the beginning of the book, was the one who presented this very sort of lofty intellectual picture. And of course, this is all set up against the backdrop of a spiritual hero, Elder Zosima, who is so incredible in his ability to give you these pithy aphorisms, these statements of wisdom based on his life of being devoted to God. And there's a chapter in this book it goes over Elder Zosima's story for many pages, and talks about how he grew up and how he came to his sainthood based on how this book is articulated. And that backdrop of sacred sainthood really gives this book a structure, and it makes you feel like you're held in this transcendent space of love, while you're also being constantly punctured by the evils of the world and the evils of the psyche. And that's why I said earlier that as a research psychologist and a personality researcher, I find this book really useful to see how we have all these multiple motivational parts of us, these subpersonalities who are driving towards their own end. And they can be cunning, and they can be nasty, and they can also be loving, and they can be prideful, and they can be collaborative and compassionate. And you see the characters wrestle with their own multiplicity so much in this book. There's a character later on in this book, a young boy. Yeah, his name is Kolya, or Nikolai Krasoskin, and he is this smart, albeit someone who he's smart, but he overestimates his intelligence. It's this smart young kid who is very prideful and has these very funny intellectual ambitions and this social status, which he clings to fervently, and he just really cares about how he's perceived by others. And so he has this sort of veneer of intellect, which Alyosha just dismantles completely with his loving disposition. I mean, that's the thing about Alyosha, is he's so loving and pure that everything just dissolves when you're in his presence in this text. And this encounter between Kolya and Alyosha is so lovely because you start to see the real person behind the veneer of Kolya. And Alyosha, he never condescends. He never arrogantly dismisses or puts down other people. He always invites them deeper, invites them into a deeper dialogue, into a deeper sense of their own personhood, where they can actually be more authentic and engage with their struggles more in a more real sense. And he does that wonderfully with this young boy. And this young boy starts to realize that he's a real boy, or become a real boy like Pinocchio, so to speak, as they continue to enter into these rich dialogues. And his veneer of arrogance kind of melts away a little more, and he becomes more engaged with reality. Now, that being said, he's still tangled in it by the end of the text, but it was just lovely the way that it was presented. And that is the same phenomenon that happens between Alyosha and Ivan. As this book unfolds, the encounters between this very stark demeanor of Ivan and his intellectual pessimism and his way in which he doubts God, and he erects a structure of cynical intellectual. He has a cynical intellectual web of ideas that narrows down into almost this nihilism, I would say, which is very alluring and convincing, because he's such a good he's such a critical thinker. He's a good philosopher, Ivan is. But as he continues to disintegrate because his philosophy ultimately is a disintegrative philosophy, and that it ends up infecting his own personality. Alyosha becomes his brilliant counterpart who is able to actually withstand the pessimism much greater than Ivan himself can, because Alyosha, he even himself is not afraid to face his own doubts. He faces his own doubts courageously, whereas Ivan is so buried in his own skeptical belief systems, and eventually this leads to this disintegrated behavior where he and himself starts dissolving into this psychic mush. And Alyosha provides a lifeline for Ivan towards the end of the book, a beacon of light. So anyways, there's no way I can do justice to just how brilliant the Brothers Karamazov is. I know a lot of my statements are sort of vague and maybe sound a little hyperbolic, but trust me, this is a really wonderful book. I'm going to do a podcast on it soon and just unpack the different layers so that, because really you could have a two-hour discussion, hour and a half discussion just on one chapter easily because it's so rich. But the last piece I want to touch on is reading this book really helped me steep myself in the Orthodox faith more, because it transported me into the environment of one who is an Orthodox Christian and practices this every day and is surrounded by other people who are a part of this Orthodox culture. And the literary genius of Dostoevsky allows you to receive that transmission in a very intense and poignant manner, which for me helped me understand the faith more. I wouldn't say that this is particularly this isn't like an Orthodox textbook. It's not instructional, but it is illustrative of the faith in some ways, in my opinion. And that was very helpful for me, because as I touched in to the deep, unerring culture of Orthodoxy, I was able to orient myself towards the faith even more. And as I continued to engage with the Orthodox faith, I found that this was a good touchstone for me. So I highly recommend this book. It is going to be a ride. If you really let this book affect you, it will disturb you, I would say. In some ways, it will also edify you in many ways. I think being willing to go on that ride is very important, because if you're in the right place in life and you can handle it, it is transformative. Going through this text is a journey of growth if we engage it properly. If we let the problems that are laid out in the text really pull out our own issues and look at how we engage life, it will just bring a new flavor to your own self-reflection, in my opinion. I mean, I cannot see how somebody could read this book and not be affected by it. So at any rate, The Brothers Karamazov, wonderful text, fantastic work of fiction. I'm moving on to Crime and Punishment now, so thanks for listening.